2 other senior officials who were present, including the Secretary of State, remember the meeting the same way and have said so. Their on-the-record accounts should outweigh those of anonymous sources. And I was in the room. It didn't happen. Thanks, everybody.
He's saying your story is false and no sources and methods were disclosed. But I want to be loud and clear here. Your story does not say sources and methods were disclosed. It says a specific plot was discussed from which one would be able to figure out sources and methods. Am I correct?
I think that's right, and I think that the White House is playing word games here to that effect to try to blunt the impact of this story. Nor do any of these White House officials who are denouncing this story, nor have any of them offered any explanation why, if this was also above board and not problematic in any way, why did the National Security Council, coming out of this meeting, feel it was necessary to contact the CIA director and the director of the National Security Agency to give them a heads up on what Trump had just told the Russians?
Right. So the bottom line is you stand by this story on every word of it. He says it's false. You say no.
Absolutely.
Welcome to the MTC Report, the news behind the news with journalist Mark Taylor-Canfield. We offer you independent voices and underreported stories about topics you won't hear anywhere else. Join us as we delve into the deeper issues behind the news stories of the day on the MTC Report.
Don't go anywhere. The MTC Report with Mark Taylor-Canfield continues next.
A lot of people give me very high marks for what I've done in terms of foreign policy. I mean, I'm getting very, very high marks on foreign policy.
The president there in his interview with Lester Holt of NBC News saying he's getting high marks in the American people on foreign policy. Perhaps, but if you look at the president's overall numbers at this moment, they're not good, to say the least. A new Quinnipiac University poll taken before the James Comey firing, we should make that clear, showed the president's approval rating dropping, his performance in office dropping. Only 36% of the American people approve the president, how he's handling his job. 58% disapprove. Noteworthy here, a slight drop among Trump-based voters, especially non-college educated whites. We'll keep an eye on this one. And you move forward, again, the president trying to get big legislative initiatives through now with all this Comey dust-up. Only 21% of the American people approve of the new Republican repeal and replace Obamacare plan. The last one was 17%, so I guess you could call that an improvement, but 21%, that's a tough sell. The president's tax plan, only 30% so far, based on what they know of. Americans say they approve of the president's tax plan. So at a time of a lot of dust in Washington over the Comey firing, bad numbers for the president on 2 important initiatives. And look at this. Quinnipiac also asked the respondents to its poll, we're going to say, Donald Trump, you give me a one-word answer of what you think of President Trump. And these results are horrible for the president. The number 1 answer, idiot, followed by incompetent, followed by liar. Leader came in next, unqualified after that, then president, strong, and businessman. Again, it's one poll, but if you're in the middle of all this and you have numbers like that, it's bad, embarrassing for the president of the United States, who nonetheless says he believes things are off to a good start and that he is mastering the work of governing.
This is Mark Taylor-Canfield for the MTC Report. As a journalist, I've written at Huffington Post, Daily Kos. I've also been a reporter for Democracy Watch News and a contributing editor. Also, I'm a weekly guest on the Jeff Santos Show, broadcasting nationally from Boston. So I wanted to talk today about these late-breaking stories. This is literally happening right now, folks. I wanted to get it out as quickly as possible. And I want to thank folks for following my channel. We have 328 videos now uploaded and lots of animation, political satire, music, and cartoons. I'm also a musician, by the way, and playing several bands, do my own music. So check out all the entertainment as well as movies there and news. But let's get on with today's report, especially the story about the meeting that Trump had with Russian officials where supposedly, according to the Washington Post and BuzzFeed, classified information was shared. So that story broke earlier today, just a few hours ago, when the Washington Post reported that Trump reportedly revealed highly classified intelligence to Russian officials during that meeting last week. So there's been a fallout happening all day long. There have been Washington Post writers commenting on Twitter. It's been quite an affair today, folks.
The president fired the FBI director overseeing a lawful investigation of the president's campaign ties to Russian influence in the president's 2016 election. That is a serious act in and of itself. However, the president also acknowledged that he considered the investigation when he fired the FBI director. The president made the FBI director subject of a threatening tweet. If the president is not above the law, he should be charged by way of impeachment by the U.S. House of Representatives.
Don't go anywhere. The MTC Report with Mark Taylor-Canfield continues next.
So, I've been following the story, especially on Twitter. It's very interesting. It's been going on all day. The reporters, one of them is named Greg Miller. He's been speaking out in defense of his report because the National Security Advisor for Trump, McMaster, actually made a public statement saying that it was false. So, also, apparently, the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, did the same thing. He came out and said that the reports were false, and yet his own State Department didn't know about his official statement. They actually learned from it from CNN. So it shows a bit of incompetence at the top levels of the Trump administration right there, don't you think, folks? So BuzzFeed has been covering this, and now it's getting around to all the national media. New York Times is following up on the story, and they're trying to verify as much of it as they can.
We're not talking about confidential. We're not talking about secret. We're not talking about top secret. This is code word information. Can you explain what that is? What kind of dots can you connect with that?
Yeah, code word is ultimate in security clearances, Anderson. It means that the programs are so significant, the sources and methods are so critically important that any discrimination or any leaks of information about that might give away damage that the program exists. I've been read in on code word programs before, both in combat and peacetime, and you're not only read in, you're also read off when you leave the program, which means you say, I will never disclose that I know anything about this program, that I will give any information about it, or even say what the code word is that describes the program. And it's because it is so dangerous, and any kind of information that comes out on a code word program could affect the fight for an adversary for that intelligence. So when you're trying to connect the dots, any specific item might be able to lead you to the source and the methods. Even though the sources and the methods and the military operations, as General McMaster said, were not given, if anything was given up, that might lead a very wise intelligence service, the Russian intelligence service, to find out more things and connect dots. It could destroy the program, ruin the relationship with the other country, generate a lack of trust with all other nations, because whatever country that this came from, others are going to see it as well. It's not just going to affect that one-on-one relationship. It's going to affect everybody that shares intelligence with our intelligence community, because they're afraid to give it to them because they don't want it given to the president, who might give it to Russia.
Phil, you worked both the CIA and the FBI. What do you make of the fact that this was a statement, according to the Washington Post and the New York Times, made by the President of the United States to two Russian officials who are, one of them is at the center of the ongoing investigations, and who were allowed into the Oval Office, the day after the FBI director is fired. I mean, you would think of all the times somebody would be careful of what they said and how they said it. It would have been that meeting right there, photos of which are being provided by the Russians because U.S. reporters were not allowed in the room at the time.
Anderson, I have a different perspective. There was a mistake here. It wasn't what the president said. Look, in October 2015, the Russians lost 220-plus people in an attack by ISIS on an aircraft over the Sinai, 220-plus. If the president had not warned about threats to aircraft and a Russian aircraft went down tomorrow, what would we say? Would we say the Americans shouldn't tell the Russians about threats from ISIS? Two mistakes were made here, and they are significant. The first was a minor mistake. It was not a moral sin. You have got to tell your foreign partners, if you're the President of the United States, I'm going to reveal your information to the Russians. I don't believe the Russians are going to leak this to ISIS. They are killing ISIS periodically in Syria. The second mistake, which I think is significant, was by General McMaster. I respect him. But he's playing us for fools. There are two elements of intelligence: what you know and how we know it. What you know about threats to aircraft and who told you. What he told us today is the president did not reveal sources and methods. Who told us? He said nothing about what the president said in terms of the actual threat. Don't play us for fools. If the president revealed the actual threat without revealing the source of the threat, please tell us, and don't play us for idiots. General McMaster really lost some credibility today. He should have been honest with us.
Two other senior officials who were present, including the Secretary of State, remember the meeting the same way and have said so. Their on-the-record accounts should outweigh those of anonymous sources. And I was in the room. It didn't happen. Thanks, everybody.
On the Donald Trump Twitter feed today, it's all quiet except for one tweet where he said, "Today I delivered remarks at the 36th Annual National Peace Officers Memorial Service. It's National Police Week in the United States."
To address America's heroes on this most solemn occasion. Words cannot express the depths of our gratitude, but I hope that our actions will show you how deeply we care and how strongly we feel about protecting those who protect us. The attacks on our police are a stain on the very fabric of our society, and you are entitled to leadership at the highest level that will draw a bright line in the sand, not a red line in the sand that isn't gone over, but a bright line in the sand, and we will protect you, that I can tell you, and we will say enough is enough. The attacks on our police must end, and they must end right now.
I have talked to doctors.
This is the MTC Report, the news behind the news, with journalist Mark Taylor-Canfield.
We can have a world-class healthcare system without waiting lines. Careful single-payer system. Second of all right, you want to talk about rationing? You got 29 million people in this country who have no health insurance. How's that for rationing? They can't go to the doctor.
There's nothing that the president takes more seriously than the security of the American people. The story that came out tonight, as reported, is false. The president and the foreign minister reviewed a range of common threats to our two countries, including threats to civil aviation. At no time were intelligence sources or methods discussed. And the president did not disclose any military operations that were not already publicly known. Two other senior officials who were present, including the Secretary of State, remember the meeting the same way and have said so. Their on-the-record accounts should outweigh those of anonymous sources. and I was in the room. It didn't happen. Thanks, everybody.
Meanwhile, McMaster gave a press conference outside of the White House denying the allegations. And other folks are saying, like Mark Warner is saying, if this is true, this is a slap in the face to the intel community. Risking sources and methods is inexcusable. So also the New York Times got scooped by the Washington Post on this story, which I think is quite interesting. The New York Times is now playing catch up. But this is happening at a time when CNN is reporting that 58% of the country disapproves of the Trump administration. And the top one-word descriptions for Donald Trump, one-word descriptions in this poll that CNN reported on were 1, idiot, 2, incompetent, and 3, liar.
A lot of people give me very high marks for what I've done in terms of foreign policy. I mean, I'm getting very, very high marks on foreign policy.
The president there in his interview with Lester Holt of NBC News saying he's getting high marks in the American people on foreign policy. Perhaps, but if you look at the president's overall numbers at this moment, they're not good, to say the least. Look at this. Quinnipiac also asked the respondents to its poll, we're going to say, Donald Trump, you give me a one-word answer of what you think of President Trump. And these results are horrible for the president. The number one answer, idiot, followed by incompetent, followed by liar. It's bad, embarrassing for the President of the United States.
So, according to U.S. Congressman Al Green, it's now time to impeach Trump. Texas Representative Al Green has called for impeachment proceedings to begin against Donald Trump. Meanwhile, McMaster is still saying that the story is fake. The U.S. National Security Advisor and the Secretary of State apparently agrees with him. And Washington Post reporter Greg Miller is still standing by his story and standing for freedom of the press. He claims that he stands by every word of it, and that the Trump administration officials are simply, quote, playing with words in their denials. But it is true that U.S. State Department officials did not know about Rex Tillerson's official statement. They did learn it from CNN.
This is the MTC Report, the news behind the news with journalist Mark Taylor-Canfield.
I've been criticized saying that, let me say it again. I believe health is a right of all people. I will fight for a Medicare for all single-payer system. Second of all right, you want to talk about rationing? You got 29 million people in this country who have no health insurance. How's that for rationing? They can't go to the doctor.
Now here's a place you always need a lot of friends.
A lot of people give me very high marks for what I've done in terms of foreign policy. I mean, I'm getting very, very high marks on foreign policy.
One thing that people should know is that the president does have extraordinary powers to declassify information. So, in the case of other public officials, this would have been an illegal act. With Trump, I'm not sure that we can say it's an impeachable offense. But it definitely shows a pattern. And I don't think a lot of folks in certain government agencies are very happy right now and are worried about keeping their secrets. Now, I had blogged months ago when Trump was first elected saying that this idea of him being a loose cannon in terms of national security issues might be a problem. And nobody else seemed to be saying that at the time, but I was. And now here we have this mess. The editorial comment is, as a journalist, I'm very happy. I wrote to Greg Miller saying this. I'm very happy that you and the Washington Post will continue to stand for freedom of the press. And as far as the Trump administration is concerned, here's my editorial comment. I am incredulous at the incompetence among some of the top Trump administration officials in response to the Washington Post story. This just sounds too much like Watergate, folks. The Washington Post responded to the denials by the Trump administration today. And Mark Berman says, no, the White House did not really deny the big Greg Miller, Greg Jaffe report on Trump's Russia leak. They're just mincing words. Mincing words is my comment there. So the Washington Post reporters are responding to tweets about Trump's attitude towards Russia. Greg Miller says his explanation for the meeting was that Putin had asked for it. The Russia scandal continues to break in the United States and around the world. Phil Knight actually was blasting McMaster's on CNN today. Russia scandal continues to break in the U.S. At CNN earlier today. One of their analysts was extremely critical of the Trump officials after this Washington Post story broke. And according to Greg Miller, the guy who helped break this big story today, which could win him a Pulitzer Prize as far as we know, he has already written, as of yesterday, about the political chaos in Washington is actually a return on investment for Moscow.
Well, I was just trying to do my job. I think that they really didn't need to do that. I mean, they could have told me to back off, to go away. I mean, at one point in the tape, you hear him tell me to get back from Kellyanne Conway, and I didn't even realize she was there until they said that. I would have been perfectly happy to do that. They didn't need to arrest me.
So their defense of their action is you can say whatever you want, First Amendment right, but you can't do whatever you want, and that you were leaning in aggressively, I guess, with your phone or something. What does that mean to you, that suggestion?
I have no idea what that means. I mean, leaning in, I mean, I was certainly trying to get my phone close enough to Secretary Price to be able to get a decent recording if he said anything, which he didn't. But you know, that was all I really wanted, was an answer to my question. And I wasn't trying to get into anyone's personal space. I wasn't trying to approach him just close enough to be able to record his response. He said in New Hampshire the other day that this was not part of a press conference. Well, he hasn't held any press conferences. He didn't hold one here, and I don't think he held one in New Hampshire, and he hasn't made himself available. If there were a press conference, I would have stood up, asked my one question, and then sat down.
Price's response on Wednesday, he commended the police in West Virginia for doing what they thought was appropriate, arresting you after you'd been shouting questions. And he did say, to your point about the press conference, that gentleman was not in a press conference. Is that a meaningful distinction to you? And what are you going to do about this?
it's not a meaningful distinction. I mean, anyone who's worked in this profession for more than a week is gotten involved in a situation where you try to get a comment from someone walking in and out. I mean, if you watch the news long enough, you'll see it. We do this constantly. And it's a public space. It's also worth pointing out that to get into the state capitol of West Virginia, you have to go past a metal detector. So everyone in that building is disarmed except for the police. What we're going to do about it, you know, I really am not sure. We're waiting for the process to move forward. We don't really know when there's going to be a hearing. I've been told that the best strategy, and I agree with this, is to fight the charges until we know a little more about what's going to happen.
Well, we all know that there's been a lot of press freedom issues going on in the United States. Reporters Without Borders ranks the United States 43rd globally in terms of press freedom, dropping from last year, and it's been dropping since the late 90s, I believe, or early 2000s. We're now 43rd in the world in terms of press freedom. There are a lot of issues like the lack of a shield law to protect journalists from having to reveal their sources. But this very antagonistic attitude by the Trump administration towards the press and these claims of fake news are really disturbing to those of us who really believe in press freedom. I think that that's a major part of course, the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, and one of the reasons why we became an independent nation. So I think folks really need to pay attention to this story as it unfolds. It's a he said, she said story right now, with the press saying one thing and the Trump administration saying something completely different. This is Mark Taylor-Canfield, and this is the MTC Report, where I try to report on the news behind the news. As a journalist, I've written at Huffington Post, Daily Kos. I've also been a reporter for Democracy Watch News and a contributing editor. Also, I'm a weekly guest on the Jeff Santos Show, broadcasting nationally from Boston.
This is the MTC Report, the news behind the news, with journalist Mark Taylor-Canfield.
I've been criticized saying that, let me say it again. I believe health is a right of all people. I will fight for a Medicare for all single-payer system. Second of all right? You want to talk about rationing? You got 29 million people in this country who have no health insurance. How's that for rationing? They can't go to the doctor.
Now here's a place you always meet a lot of friends.